G'day jabronis, it is the Verd, and welcome to the first week of Power Rankings for the GBA Season 8. This is technically week 0. What we're going to be doing today is ranking teams based on their draft, and I guess also on the players themselves. Of course, I'm not alone. I'll be joined by my lovely co-host every week, Aberforth.
Hello.
Sounded like Mind Turtle then.
I mean, that's all I have to say.
Brilliant. Anyway, so for those of you who are still a bit new to Power Rankings, basically the 16 teams that are competing in this season of the GBA will be ranked here. We're going to be ranking it for the first week especially based off of their draft and player ability, and then throughout the season, however well they do in battles and whatnot, we'll be constantly probably shifting and changing, and eventually we'll have rankings probably looking very similar, but I'm actually glad they're a bit different because it gives us a lot of points of discussion, which is exciting. But enough jibber jabber. Let's get into the bottom team, which we actually both agreed on.
We only have 3 teams that we agreed on, and before we get into it, I'd just like to apologize to any of the people that I saw in the stream in particular who are wanting the grading system to come back. Me and Verd aren't as used to that sort of stuff. We're more used to doing it in a list sort of format. So that's what we're going to be focusing on.
Indeed.
So the bottom ranked team is the Melbourne Ringtoms, Cybertrons team, with Mimikyu Pelipers, Porygon Zed, Heliolisk, Ludicolo, Raichu, Megapert, Kartana, Kingdra, Hitmontop, and Sliggoo. Now, this team isn't necessarily a bad team, but in my opinion, it does show that Aaron doesn't have that much experience in the draft format. There's some decisions that he made, such as round 1 Mimikyu, and then not making the Mimikyu the Z move user, and the heavy rain that aren't really done so much in normal draft leagues. Obviously, he's an amazing player. You can't be as good at VGC as he is without being an amazing player. And Rain is very threatening, and I've looked at some of the matchups he's got, and he's definitely going to win them just by the combination of Pelipper plus Kingdra. But overall, I feel like he's going to struggle with this draft, and I think he's probably going to make some changes to it just to alleviate some of the weaknesses. For example, this is something I don't really blame him for, but his rocker is Mega Swampert, and he doesn't have another rock setter. And things like that are stuff that you only really know if you play singles. And coming from VGC, where Stealth Rock isn't a move, essentially, he's not picked up Stealth Rock, he's not picked up Spikes or T-Spikes or Webs or anything, which could really help his team. But they are vital in a singles format, and I think that his team does severely lack for not having them.
Yeah, I have to agree. Obviously, I put him at the bottom as well, so I definitely agree that he has the weakest draft. I don't necessarily, like you said, think it is a bad draft by any means. He's going to have a lot of matchups where he is going to be favourable. I think the big factor with this one, and it was the same thing that people had with Wolfie when he first came into League play, was just how well can a player transition, because obviously Wolfie, he didn't get the hang of it straight away in the WBE, but then he went on, obviously, to win the entire league, and that's why, I feel like he could have a very, very good season. But the thing with Aaron is we don't know how well he's going to adapt to the league format, and how well this team's going to go. Interestingly though, both of these guys have done their first seasons of Draft League, both with Rain teams, which is quite fascinating. I think it's a solid Rain team, nothing really standing out too much. I think it's a threatening team to build for, but I think there are a lot of holes and flaws, and it's really just going to come down to, like we said, how well Aaron can adapt to Draft League play as opposed to VGC, because a lot of the calcs are different, a lot of the plays are different, it's a completely different mindset. So we have him at the bottom just because the team isn't that great, but if he does, get
That's not to say there's not good things.
Yeah.
That's not to say there's not good things about the team, though, because I love the Rain Kartana. I think he's got with the 4 Rain abusers in terms of Pelipper, Ludicolo, Megapert, and Kingdra. I think that's a really good core of 4 Mons and Kartana for 5, but things like the Mimikyu and the Porygon Z, Heliolisk and Raichu on the same team, they don't gel with the other draft teams, and I would be entirely unsurprised to see him change Heliolisk for something later in the season, for example.
For sure. We are going to move on, though. The next team I have for myself that I guess I'll talk about is the Columbus Chew. Now, okay. Abe is currently an honorary Australian, but we don't use... When we say the letter Z, we don't say Z, we say Z. So for all those who enjoy being triggered, prepare yourselves, because we're going to be calling him Battler Z. I mean, actually, it could be a she. I'm not going to assume genders. It's still, 2018, man. You never know. But Battler Z is who we're talking about next. Well, I'm going to be talking about. Columbus Chew. The draft started off very strong. I was very excited by Excadrill, Manaphy, Clefable. I think Z Manaphy is a terrifying mon to have to deal with. Drill and Clef make a fantastic pairing in like 2/3 of the Fairy Dragon Steel Core. But then I feel the draft kind of just doesn't really go anywhere. I think the issue with this team, in my opinion, is that it has 3 very good Pokemon, and the rest of the team is just very bland. I guess just read out the full team. So the full team is Excadrill, Manaphy, Clefable, Porygon 2, Sneasel, Mienshao, Celebi, Weezing, Mega Ampharos, Relicanth, and Blaziken. So I think that it's, again, not a bad team like Cybertron's. I just feel the structure is very janky, and I feel that it's very dependent on those top 3 mons basically coming every week and putting in a big shift. And I think the big thing too is that Coach Z, an unknown quantity when it comes to battling. We don't know how good they're going to be, so I can't just put them straight at the top and say they're going to be like the GOAT. They're an unknown quantity, kind of like Cybertron, so I put them down in the bottom and I want to see where they go from here. But obviously, Abe, you don't have Battler Z at 15. Who do you have?
I have Battler Z. I didn't know he was making a return. No, I have Coach Z at 10. Several places above. I feel like you're overlooking some of the potential he's got just on the bulkier side of things in more of a story aspect. But for example, the Celebi plus the Porygon 2 and the Weezing coming together, Sneasel as a Pursuit Trapper, Mega Ampharos has a fat set, Clefable's obviously brilliant. Offensively, I'm not that impressed by it, but in terms of its bulk, it's one of the best teams in the league just at being fat and sitting there. And I do think that that's something that people have to play around and figure out how they're going to beat. I obviously only have him at 10, so it's not as if I'm putting him very high, but I do think that if he preps well, and if his opponents maybe don't account for certain things in prep, then he'll do well this season. So yeah, I'm more optimistic there. Also, things like Z Rain Dance Manaphy helps mitigate some of the speed tier issues. The only real big thing that I would say drags him down significantly is the removal options he has on the team, which is essentially just Excadrill spinning. And, I mean, Blaziken can now defog as well, I suppose, but those aren't exactly the best at removing hazards. You don't want Excadrill to be forced to remove hazards, and you want Blaziken, if it comes, to be a little bit more offensive than a defog set. So that's why I've got him. That's why I've pulled him back from potentially being in my top half. But yeah, I think he's better than you're giving him a bit of credit for there. Obviously, we'll have to see though as the first few weeks of the season happen and we get a bit more of a feel of Coach Z as a battler.
Well, moving on from that then, I guess, the team that you actually have in 15th is the Florida Gators. Would you like to maybe go into a bit more detail on why you put them there?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm not honestly a fan of most of the things that happened with the Gators draft, basically. And to say that in more clear language, Heatran round 1, I'm not that much of a fan of it when there's things like Celesteela still available, Jirachi as well, options like that. I know Gatorade enjoys Heatran, but even so, I think that again there were better options still on the table. Although Mamoswine, round 2 Mamoswine is fair, but the draft just doesn't really click for me. He's got a couple of doubles up on typings, for example things like the Crobat and the Drapion. The type null is interesting, but I don't know how useful he's going to find it as a slow pivot. Mega Altaria and Flygon again doubling on the dragon typing, although Mega Altaria is more of... Generally, I don't see much of the offensive synergy. It does have quite a bit more defensive synergy, admittedly, in terms of things like Buzzwole pairing really well with Heatran and Mamoswine. But as far as offensively, I'm not that much of a fan of this. I don't see the particular threat, basically. And by that I'm not meaning in terms of switching into, but I don't see a Mon that I look at and think, if I overlook that or if I misprep for that, that's going to sweep me. Like, there's Mons like Nihilego or Lando Bukoko, and if you overlook them in prep, they're going to destroy you. And I don't really think that Gator has that, and the lack of real star power on his team has made me rank him really low as a result. Also, I kind of feel like Buzzwole and Flygon are not his best two choices for Z-move users, but oh well.
Yeah, I agree with you on a lot of these points, because obviously I have him 14th, so I can understand a lot of that. I think the big thing, like you said, is the constant stack up on typings. Like, I'm a big stickler for somebody who can try and get as much coverage as possible when it comes to typings, because it means that you're not going to be as weak to a lot of things, whereas, you know, he's put a lot of Mons with the same typings on this team. I mean, his Fire Water Grass core is Heatran Superior Floatzel. It's a Floatzel as his only water type, Floatzel. Which...
Yeah, Floatzel isn't exactly a great
like, water. Don't get me wrong, you can sometimes use, like, offensive water types, such as, like, Greninja, as a decent water for the Fire Water Grass core, but I just feel like Floatzel is not going to be something that fits in that role. And I know that Gator has, you know, his big affection for, what did he call it, Tokiomi last season is a Heatran name, and Thick with 2 C's is the Mamoswine. Like, I get that he used them last season and he enjoyed them, but I think that what it shows, which I don't think he wants it to show, but it shows that Gator is very one-dimensional, and that he can't think more outside the box, and he only goes with the Mons that he feels comfortable with, which some people might say is a strength, because if he's good with those Mons, then all the more to him. I see it as a weakness, because it shows that he's not willing to be as creative and out there with not only his Mon selection, but it also might be with his set selection. Because we all know that Gator's favourite set with Mamoswine is, like, what, Life Orb 4 attacks, so we'll see what happens. I have him low because I expected more from his draft this season, but to see, like, 2 of the first picks that he took being the exact same as last season was just really underwhelming for me. But you know what? As an analyst, I'm always keen to see players prove me wrong, so I'm hoping Gator can do that. But moving on, let's go to one of Gator's compatriots in Chimpact, who is the coach of the Philadelphia Sizzles. You actually have Chimpact at 14th, Abe. What about his draft really didn't sit well with you?
The round 5 Mega Camerupt.
Hey, come on.
That didn't so well. That didn't sit very well.
Regulator is sitting at home shaking his head at you right now.
And I'm sure that everyone watching knows exactly who that is. Anyway, Chimp just made a number of decisions in his drafting that I don't really get that much. And if he proves me wrong, he proves me wrong. Obviously, I love the fact that he got Victini round 11. The fact that that was his last Mon is pretty insane to me. But then picking Greninja and Guzzlord as his Z-move users instead of maybe making Victini his actual Z-move user. The Bulu, he's built round the Bulu quite well. But then there's things like the Mega Camerupt being picked up. Magnezone, I don't really think that he needed Magnezone on this team. Guzzlord as well, I feel like there were better options for him than Guzzlord. Although I think Guzzlord's a good Mon, especially as a tier 5. But as far as some of the cores that I always look for in terms of bulky Fairy Dragon Steels and Firewater Grasses, the Fairy Dragon Steel is Bulu, Guzzlord, and Magnezone, and that's not really a Fairy Dragon Steel core in the classical sense of what you'd expect those Mons to do for that role. And the bulky water is a Cloyster, and the grass type has to double on being a fairy type as well. There's just a number of things I don't really see clicking that well offensively. I think that he's built well around the Bulu, but at the expense of some of his other Mons. and I think that he's going to need to use some transactions to maybe fix a couple of things on that team. For example, maybe getting a better Steel or a better Dragon, replacing Magnezone or Guzzlord, and things like that. I do, however, very much like the Rabombi. I think that late pickup is going to serve him really well this season. Webs with Tapu Bulu and Nihilego and Cloyster and Victini, I think that's a very, very good idea that he's got going there. But even then, those are the mons that actually take advantage of it, and the other mons in this team, like Scrafty and Guzzlord and Magnezone and Mega Camerot, they're all relatively slow. They don't take advantage of webs or their Greninja, and they outspeed anything anyway. But yeah, there's just a couple of things like that, and the doubling on typing in terms of things like Guzzlord and Scrafty. There's just quite a few issues I have with this team. I think the Chimpact is still going to do really well. He's a very good player, and I think he's going to be able to use his team quite well. But in terms of the team itself, it's not. I'm not impressed by it personally.
That's fair enough. Now, I have him ranked a bit higher, but obviously with these rankings, what we'll try and do is, as we go through where each team is ranked, we'll talk about each one. So I'm going to save my chat about the Philadelphia Sizzles for a bit later up when they're shown again. But the last team I guess we'll talk about on this slide is another team, the second of 3 teams that we actually have in the exact same spot, and that is the Victorian Shadows, coached by Necro Stevo, who I personally think hasn't actually drafted a bad team at all. I have been a big stickler for Mega Alakazam. I think the fact that it is so fast and it can run a modest nature with so much bulk investment and still outspeed so many things in the meta, run a speed tier where I think it's base 70s, can't even outspeed it when they're scarfed, is obscene. Like, that's just a ridiculous thing. And it has a variety of really good moves, like Miracle Eye Mega Alakazam means you can actually Oko Alolan Muck, which is a sick meme. But then also looking at, he has the Sand Synergy when it comes to T-Tar and Lycanroc. I guess the big things that I kind of had an issue with this team was, aside from Diggersby and maybe Mega Alakazam, I didn't really see a big breaker on his team. I saw some good standard ones, Araquanid is nice and bulky, so is Rotom, and Delmise is alright, and Hawlucha, if it sets up, is good. But the thing with Hawlucha too is, Hawlucha's really suited for a team that has a Tapu, because you can run the Seed, and that gives you a really easy unburden. So picking up something like Coco would have been so good for this team, or any of the Tapus, really, obviously not using Lele, but any of the 3 Tapus with it could have been really, really helpful, and I feel like he wasted a really good opportunity there. And I also feel that the overall balance of the team isn't that strong when you compare it with all of the other teams you'll see later on. I feel the balance isn't quite there. I do like that he has some Volt Turn Core, and Togekiss is really Togekiss, even the combination of Togekiss and T-Tar is actually a really nice combo, but I just feel like a lot of these things are kind of mismatched, and a lot of the things that these mons would normally synergize with aren't on this team, so it's a bit of a kind of mixed bag. But obviously you have them in the same spot, Abe. Do you have any other things you want to add on?
I actually kind of disagree with you on Hawlucha. That was actually one of the picks I was most keen about him picking up, because I believe that in leagues like this, if you're gonna be scared of facing a particular combo, there's no real better counterplay than picking up one of them yourself. And by picking up Hawlucha, he's just effectively taken away the tool of Hawlucha from Chimpact, who really wanted it, I believe. He said in Joey's video that went up a couple days ago, and Envy. And he's now given himself a good advantage in those matchups as well. So I actually feel like picking up Hawlucha might be a very good decision that he's made in the end, especially given that it is a good mon by itself as well. Generally, I feel like his team is underwhelming, but not in any specific way. I just feel like, again, there's things like T-Tar was... it's an okay round 1, but there are better options still on the board. And things... that was the general gist I got from his team. He picked up mons that I feel are okay and doesn't really have a star factor, essentially, unfortunately. But Mega Alakazam is good, and the Hawlucha and Diggersby, all of these are very good at what they do, and I think he'll use them well. It's just a matter of if that translates to overcoming... I'm trying to find a better way of saying it than just a relative mehness, because generally I feel like his team is kind of underwhelming.
I think he just needs to find ways, and like Steve-O is the kind of player that can do it, just find ways to use his team creatively enough to make it more difficult to face. I think is that kind of thing. But I think one of the themes as well you guys will find through these power rankings is us being upset at people for their first round picks because of then what other people got as first round picks. But we'll get to that a bit later on. So that concludes the first of our group of teams. We're going to move on to the next group now, starting with the 12th place teams. Now, both of us have picked teams that the other person has ranked a bit higher, but we're just going to talk about our teams both respectively. So we'll start with you, Abe. You've obviously got the San Diego Chimp Chargers, MV's team. What are you finding the issues are with it?
Well, I've just realised I've put all of Chimp, MV, and Gator in the bottom 5.
I guess somebody's not going to be on Pokemon Jeopardy anytime soon.
People are going to hate me. MV I feel has drafted a generally quite good team, but there are a few issues with it, for me personally at least. His removal, he doesn't have any spin options, and I feel like that's kind of... I would always want to use that on a Mega Pinsir build. I feel like Defog is just not really that great in that scenario, especially when your defoggers are Coco, which you don't want to run defog on, Empoleon, which has no reliable recovery, and Gligar, which isn't great, essentially. I mean, you could run defog on Mega Pinsir itself, but that kind of ruins the point. Then his hazards, he just has rocks and doesn't have any spikes to help break things for Mega Pinsir. And yeah, most of the big problem I have with his team though is that most of his mons are quite one-dimensional. Obviously, the big exception here is Hooper Unbound, who is very versatile. But with Hippowdon, with mostly Empoleon, although he can run agility on it, with Kyurem, with Gligar, with Stoutland, even with Mega Pinsir, Incineroar, Girder and stuff, with all of those mons I've just mentioned, if you see them in Team Preview, you almost certainly know what they're going to do, and the lack of options he's got on most of his team is something I don't think suits Envy. I think he genuinely thrives on heat. I think he thrives on being creative and finding stuff like Rock Polished Donphan to sweep teams with and things like that. Whereas on this team, I'm not so sure that many monsters on it can really do that, and I don't think that suits him. I'd rather see him with mons like Donphan and things like that, which he can really use very well, as he's proven. And obviously Tapu Koko and Hooper Unbound, that's scary. He's going to win a lot of games based on his skill and through those two and their powers. But generally, I was looking forward to seeing what sort of creative mons MV would draft, and I'm left underwhelmed by just one job, and I don't think that suits him, which the opponent will never know what he's going to do with.
That's fair enough. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's up to debate on how people feel like his team's going to function. There's going to be some people who say, like, oh, it's a god squad, he's going to, like, sweep the competition, or there's going to be those that say, well, like, look at all these flaws. So, it's good. It's good discussion. The team that I actually have in 12th is the Detroit Steel Wings, coached by Crimson Seabad. I don't necessarily think Crimson has drafted a poor team. I actually think the funny thing about Crimson, I have found almost every season, he is actually a really good drafter. Like, most of the seasons that I've seen him in the GBA, I've actually really liked his team, but this one is no exception. I guess one of the things that was a major factor in me kind of doing this ranking of Crimson, unfortunately came down to his battling ability. I think not just in the sense of like how he is generally as a battler. I also felt like I was thinking about a lot of the mons that he's picked up in regards to the kind of style that he plays. I think a lot of these mons, like we were talking about, in the hands of other players have been quite good, but obviously in Crimson's hands they're very much an unknown quantity. and so I'm a bit tentative to kind of jump the gun on Crimson given his track record when it comes to playing. So overall though, the team is incredible. So I think the biggest thing about this team, we've been talking about with most of these teams, is defensive cores. I think, having like Jirachi, Suicune, Kofag, Donphan, Granbull, even Tangela as a cheap grass type. Tangela is no joke with a regen. With Eviolite regen.
Can live a flare but can bomb at a time.
It's kind of insane what Tangela can do. And even like a low tier pick of Kangaskhan is surprisingly solid. I'm not sure about Z-Boos, but I assume it was like that or Tangela, so I can kind of understand why Kangaskhan has them. But being able to go for Fake Out when you have, Toxic Spikes with Kofag is a really nice combo. So I think there's a lot of good elements to the team. One of the big things I noticed though was like Thundy. I would say mainly Thundy and Infernape are his two best breakers. To say that Jirachi is a breaker is to say that you're basically relying on Choice Scarf Ironhead to be a breaker. Like, I think it's good at like the bulky support role, or potentially going for that Scarf set, or tricking a thing, but I don't think it's necessarily going to break open a lot of teams. Like Suicune potentially can do some stuff, like we all know how annoying Crocoon can be, but I'd say realistically his team only has two very powerful breakers in Infernape and Thundurus. I like his Volt Turn core though. Like, I mean, I used Mega B recently to mixed reviews, and I think it is a solid Pokemon. But again, the big thing about Crimson's team is I think he's drafted a good team, but I have my doubts on how well he as a player will use it. But we'll get to European and Crimson later on, because I don't want to ramble on too much. We'll move on to the next pair of teams that we have here, and on your side here you have the Bronx Bearatics and PokeMMD. Another one of that gang down there quite low, but you got something against them?
Obviously, I've not got anything against Joey. He and I are good friends. I know that the comments are going to hate me for putting them all down low, but despite the fact that I saw his draft recap, and despite the fact that your opponent won't know which hidden power to choose, having so many 4x weaknesses on your team is not something I admire. I think he's got 3 4x weaknesses to ground, a 4x weakness to ice, 4x weakness to poison, 4x weakness to flying, 4x weakness to water, 4x weakness to grass, 4x weakness to electric if he doesn't Mega Evolve. There's so many big weaknesses for most of his mons. I'd find each of them trying to wall anything unreliable. Obviously though, that's not where Joey's strength is going to be, and it's going to be in the more offensive areas, and I think that he's going to do really well. I fully expect him to make playoffs, but in terms of just on the strength of this draft, I'm not as convinced. And stuff, for example, Zygarde 50 I think is fine as a first round pick, although I wouldn't necessarily have picked it when he was as high as he was, because there are mons that I think are better still left. But if you want Zygarde 50, you've got to get it in the first round or you're not going to get it at all. Stack Attacker, I actually think it's a really intelligent second round pick, because I think it's going to destroy a lot of teams. Whimsicott and stuff like that, they're good mons on their own, but combine them and looking at the... I'm imagining his matchup against a Mew, where he's just got to try and switch into it, and he doesn't know what move it is. And he doesn't have any reliable switch into anything that gets significant mixed coverage. And not just Mew, but things like Jirachi, even things like Manaphy and stuff. He's got mons that can situationally beat them, but his team will struggle in dealing with things defensively. Offensively, I think Mega Gyarados is an amazing pickup, especially given that he doesn't need to Mega Evolve. I think that the number of setup options he's got on this team is amazing. I think that all bar 2 mons I think can set up, all bar 3 maybe. And obviously offensively he's got things like the Aselgor still there. Salazzle I think is a great pick. As I would, I was the one that convinced him to get it. But things like that, they him. But in terms of just the strength of the team defensively, I'm not seeing the great synergy there. So that's why I have him ranked so low. obviously as a player, I rate him highly, and I think he's going to do really well this season. Draft, I would have him much lower.
That's definitely understandable. So the team that I have at 11th alongside Joey is the Milwaukee Bears, coached by Wolfie. I was very impressed with how Wolfie played in his first draft league. Obviously, winning the entire championship was incredible. And he was, again, like I said with the whole Cybertron thing, he didn't find his feet straight away, but he got the hang of it and finished incredibly strongly. And this was an interesting draft to kind of look over, because it started with Reuniclus, which is not normally a mon that you see drafted first round, let alone in the first like 4 rounds.
He traded his third pick overall with the promise that Envy would not snipe his Reuniclus.
That's kind of crazy, but like, I mean, each to their own. Like, Reuniclus is a very good mon, and then like his first 4 picks were very interesting, being Reuniclus, Tangrowth, Florges, and Mega Chomp. All mons that I wouldn't really expect to be picked up early. And the funny thing is though, when I look at Wolfie's entire team, I do not see a mon that I would say, yes, I will draft that round 1. I don't see a single Pokemon in that regard, which is kind of odd to see in a draft. You don't really see that, and so I'm kind of thrown off by it. I also am a little bit questionable over the synergy of everything. I think defensively speaking, having, you know, Reuniclus, Tangrowth, Florges, Alolan Muck, Zong, Jellicent, even Conk to an extent, and Silvally isn't bad. But
that's most of his team, to be fair.
Silvally and Conkeldurr are debatable, because like Conk would need to be an AV set, and Silvally really depends on if it's going for parting shot or not. I still think Alolan Persian is a better parting shot user, but that's just me. I guess the big thing about his team that I'm a bit concerned for is how he's going to break opposing teams, because I think the only 3 breakers I can really identify are Conk, Xurkitree, and Megachomp, which you might say like, oh yeah, well, they can all, you know, break pretty well. Like, for all intents and purposes, all 3 can pretty much be walled by a bulky ground type. So there's that. I mean, I know it's debatable, but like, as in, you know,
it's not debatable. I think that's not accurate.
I mean, I know Zerk gets Energy Ball and whatnot, but
and Conkeldurr will beat most bulky grounds. Garchomp will outpower most bulky grounds. Yeah, anyway, I'll get to Wolfie when it gets to
my thing is just more. I feel that it's kind of like we were talking about with Coach Zed, is that the bulky side is good, but I'm more concerned with the offensive side, because if you think about it, like, yes, he has 3 great offensive breakers, but is he bringing all 3 every week in order to break down his opponent's walls is the question. And I do believe that Wolfie can do well, but I'm ranking him 11th because I want to see if he can back up what he did in the WBE and transfer that over to this league, just to see if, you know, was it a fluke or was it meant to be. I'm still a bit skeptical on it. But regardless, speaking of the Columbus Chew, they are your 10th pick.
I already covered.
I know you did. You freaking jumped the gun. You jumped the gun.
So do you just want to talk about Chimp back then? And,
yeah. So obviously, yes, I will agree with Abe that Mega Camerupt that early was a silly pick. You could have picked up Victini at that point and picked up Mega Camerupt, and it would have saved you a little bit of face. But you chose to pick up Camerupt at 5th and Victini last. It didn't matter in the end, but it still just doesn't look as, I don't know, right. I for one think that Chimp's team is interesting, but at the same time, throughout the GBA history that I've seen Chimp draft, I've known that his draft has never really mattered that much. I think he's drafted some interesting teams with not that much balance and still gone on to make playoffs pretty consistently because of how good of a player he is, and I think this team is no exception. Like you were saying, there are some good elements to it. I think that the cores, especially of Bulu plus Magnezone and Guzzlord plus Victini, are 2 cores that I find very, very interesting. Sorry, I just got the hiccup right now. I find very, very interesting. I think Camel could be a good mon. I think it's one of those things that it's really important that he has Greninja and Victini as pivot mons, because not so much Victini, but a lot of the things that would wall Greninja, Camel can deal with. The only thing that annoys me is that Victini and Greninja both get U-turn, but there's no point U-turning out into Camel because they couldn't deal with the bulky water, but that's why then having Bulu is so big. Like, the combo of Bulu plus Camerupt breaks through almost every single wall in the game. So that's a massive factor. I think offensively speaking, Chimp's team is quite solid, and yes, I agree that there are a lot of holes, there are a lot of issues, there's a lot of, again, the double ups and everything, but overall, I think that it's a solid team. It's not the best. I think the biggest issue with it is the hazard removal, like you said. I just think that having your 2 hazard removal ones being weak to rocks is just not good at all. Like, it just doesn't seem that solid. But at the same time, I know how good Chimp is as a player, and I know that there are still some serious threats on his team, so he's not in the top half of the group because it could be better, but I'm optimistic.
I do see what you're saying, and obviously he is a bit worried though. I feel like this is one of the more underwhelming drafts he's gotten, and what's more, the GBA, generally speaking, has added better players than they've lost. And that's dig, but you've got Cybertron, who came in 3rd in the Worlds, Wolfie, who actually won it. You've got Joey as well, who's a very good battler. Some of our to praise too much in case it looks like I'm just doing it because they're my friends.
You put him
but,
11th.
Like,
I don't think they're going to care.
Good. I was talking about Joel and Astor there, well done.
Got him.
But generally, I feel like the quality of the GBA has improved as well, and so it might not be enough to just rely on his ability as a player anymore. He might need to have a good draft as well, because now it's with respect to A-Drive, Wolfie and Joey are, in my opinion. So if he does well, I'm happy to eat my words, but yeah.
Fair enough. Well, it's funnily enough that you mentioned both Jolt and Astor, because when it comes to ranking the 9th teams in the GBA, we both have them there. How convenient that you mentioned that, Abe. So, would you like to talk about Astor's team?
Sure, I'll talk about Astor. I actually quite like most of the aspects of Astor's draft. There's some elements that I'm not that much of a fan of, but for example, Megalopony, I think that's a great first pick overall. Scolipede as a Zedmon, I think that's a good pick. Sylveon for bulk, Darmanitan, which I love using personally. They're all good picks, but then when I look at his team a bit more, and it just seems is very one-dimensional. Then I don't think any other team in this league is. The only mons, a bit of nuances to what they're going to do, are Decidueye and Zoroark. And everything else, Scolipede, it's got the spikes versus the sword dancing set, but that's very similar in how they play. Sylveon has variations on the same set. Darmanitan, it's got a couple of creative options, but mostly it's just going to be the fast physical fire breaker. Steelix is just going to sit there and be fat, but again, it's like with Envy, but his team, most of the mons on it are quite one-dimensional, and as a result I have him just outside of the top half. Saying that though, the one-dimensional mons are very, very good at what they do. Like, Scolipede is very good at what it does, Megalopony is excellent at what it does, Darmanitan is amazing at what it does, Sylveon's a great mon just in general, and Zoroark does help with that a lot, but on the DS in particular, it's not going to be as effective, because if they've ever battled a Zoroark before, they can do pretty easily. It'll show that it's a Zoroark, so it's lost quite a bit of its effectiveness from Gen 6, so as a result, there's just, it's just so comfortable putting it in the top half. But yeah, if you want to move on to Jolt now, you can.
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. Yes, when it comes to Jolt, here is what we were talking about when we said, you remember how people were drafting certain picks before Jolt, and Jolt shouldn't have got a certain Pokemon? So, for all intents and purposes, Jolt had, what was it, the 10th pick in the draft, something like that? It was a very late pick in the draft.
I believe
He had like 14th. No, he had 13th or something like that. I don't know. Regardless, he had a very late pick, but was still able to get Celesteela. And Celesteela from...
Which I think both of us think is one of the best ones in the league.
I think, without a doubt, it is the best steel type in format. I think it's better than any other steel type that we currently have. People can argue me on that. I will happily sit down with some hot chocolate and argue with that. So, but I think Jolt's team overall is quite solid. But like he has admitted himself as well, he wasn't very happy with it, and that's where I kind of break down my analysis, because I know Jolt very, very well, and I know how he drafts, and I know that he's a good player, but in this aspect, I think he just hasn't drafted a team that he's happy with, and it makes me very unhappy too, because I like seeing people draft teams and have that confidence when they finish a draft. So seeing him have that lack of confidence shows that, you know, he may then struggle with the team in the early stages. I think that, you know, Selly plus Mega Venu plus Seismitoad is a really nice little core there. I think that, you know, Doggo is not a bad mon. Like I said, I think Alolan Persian is a fantastic Pokemon. Ladio's decent little wall breaker and whatnot. So I think that he's got some options there. But like we've said with some other drafts, I just feel like a lot of it is kind of all over the place. Like there's not that kind of sense of harmony with a lot of the team. And one of the big things I noticed too with this initial team is there's a lot of pressure on Celesteela to really deal with a lot of threats. Like to say, like obviously Seismitoad, Arcanine, Megavino, they can deal with things as that Fire, Water, Grass core, but Selly is gonna have a lot of like, because the problem is like Selly is such a good offensive Pokemon. Like with an Autotomize set, it can just break teams apart. But I just fear that with a lot of Jolt's matchups, he's going to have situations where he's only going to be able to bring defensive Selly sets. He's not going to be able to show off its versatility as much. And so that's something I'm kind of afraid of. I think the team would be a bit better if he makes some transactions in the future. I think, you know, getting some more mons that kind of fit his playstyle compared to what he has now will benefit him greatly. But overall, like, it's not a bad draft. He's just out of my top half. I think he's a good enough player to where he'll still do well, but when a player says even by themselves they haven't drafted the best, then they need to be ranked accordingly, I think.
Yeah, I've got Jolt coming up very shortly, so
we'll flip over to the next slide, which is coming up right now, and you may talk about Jolt, who you've put at number 7.
Really?
Well, we'll talk about Wolfie in a sec. It's fine. We're snowballing.
Okay, sure. Jolt's team, I put it a bit higher just generally because there's a lot of... I know Jolt very well personally as well. He's a good friend of mine, and I feel like he's got a lot of options that Jolt... for example, things like the Mega Venusaur and the Arcanine and the Seismitoad, they suit him really well. He is familiar with those mons very well. I like Staraptor as a breaker. I think it's an amazing breaker. Latios, I think, maybe doesn't fit the team as well when he's got things like Gardevoir there as well. He could get a different dragon maybe. But yeah, the big problem I have with his team is his hazard situation, where his only hazard mon is Seismitoad, and frankly, I'm fully expecting him to make transactions to remedy that very, very quickly. But aside from the fact he doesn't have hazards, most of the mons in his team I like a lot, especially when I consider how well they work together in terms of the things that Zygarde can't beat, Mega Venusaur, the things that Durant I think is an amazing pickup. I think it's an amazing... But unfortunately he couldn't go that plus said Celesteela, so oh well. Rotom Spook, which is our name for Rotom, the ghost form, is a very, very good Pokemon. I think it's undervalued at tier 5 and amazingly with it. It's also a good Zedmon because it does get very, very good that you might not expect it to be able to get if you've not really looked into its move pool, although most of the code looked into it. But Celesteela is such an amazing mon, and I know that he's going to use it very well. And my faith in him has meant that I put him up to number 7. But generally, the synergy, the Firewater Grass Core, the Fairy Dragon Steel Core, we were talking about Fairy Dragon Steels earlier with Bulu Guzzlord and stuff, whereas Chimp has Cellar Stealer plus Zygarde plus Gardevoir, and his Firewater Grass Core is Arcanine, Mega Venusaur side instead. I think that those are just good ones to do really well with, basically.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a step up from the other ones, and that's kind of showing how we feel, guys, progression-wise. You can kind of see the gap difference between some of the lower teams to the higher teams. But we're talking about another team that I've actually put at 7th that you had down a bit lower in the San Diego Chimp Chargers. So, obviously, we both know how good MV is as a player, and I will admit, this was not his best draft by a long shot, but I think there's one big thing that you kind of overlooked in what you were saying, and you said the only, I know you didn't mean to say it this way, but you were saying before that the only real big, versatile mon he had was Hooper, when obviously even...
And Coco.
Yeah, I was going to say, even earlier on in this video, you were talking about how if you don't prepare well enough for Coco, it can destroy teams, and I think that's going to be a big weapon in MV's arsenal, is the fact that he has 2 mons there in Hooper and Coco that are very hard to prep for, very hard to deal with just on their own. Having them on the same team is going to be a whole different story. It's 2 incredibly powerful breakers, be it with physical or special offenses. One is quite fast, one has access to Trick Room so it can get more speed that way even, which also ties in potentially with the Slowbro, could have some synergy there. Potentially even with Empoleon, which obviously can get agility, so that could be the new Don fan this season, is agility Empoleon. But I think that Coco and Hooper, with the ability they have to break, can also set up for late game pincer sweeps very, very easily. Could be a thing. I think Gligar is not the worst pickup for him. I agree that it's not the best defogger, but I think even just as a wall, it's quite solid. Being able to pivot out with U-turn is nice, and having a mon like Slowbro on the team with it is really handy because it's kind of twofold. Bro basically deals with all of Gligar's weaknesses, but at the same time Gligar has immunity, which means any mon that tries to Toxic Slowbro is going to get negated out by Gligar. The biggest issue I would say with MV's team that I found is just it has quite a big weakness to knockoff users. Unless Coco's running a Z move, I think that, knockoff is going to be a very frustrating move to have to face, because first and foremost, he doesn't really have that many resistances to knockoff in general, and the things that do resist knockoff don't really want to be knocked off, like Gerda, for example. When have you ever wanted your Gerda to be knocked off when it's 9 times out of 10 going to be running Eviole Light? So I think that's a big factor. I think the reason why I put him up so high was that I rate MV so highly as a player, and I feel that the offense is good enough on this team to kind of outweigh how shoddy the flaws that you mentioned earlier are. And because of MV's style, where he's a bit more, kind of plays aggressively, has a couple of defensive pivots, this team kind of suits that. And I feel that he will do quite well with it, even though on paper it doesn't look as solid. So that's kind of what I'm backing there, but regardless, we are going to move on. So a team that I had a bit lower that you've got... Yes, go.
I'll talk about Wolf.
That's
now.
what I was going to say.
I was just wanting to make sure we weren't going to overlook the number 8 entirely.
I was basically going to say, now, I had Wolfie down lower, you have him at 8. Why have you put him a bit higher?
Initially I had Wolfie very low. I wasn't liking his draft, but the more I'm looking into it, the more I'm liking it, and the more I also think you can see the influence of VGC on his drafts. You've got things like Reuniclus for Trick Room, Bronzong for Trick Room 2, Xurkitree, things like that. I think they're mons that he's going to be able to use well based on his familiarity with some of them, along with Muck as well. But generally, the more I look at it, the harder I find it to break his team, because generally with the Regenerator core of Reuniclus plus Tangrowth, despite how much I hate Reuniclus using Regenerator, with the bulk he's got, with the pursuit options as well with Muck to remove psychics that could otherwise be a problem for Conkeldurr in particular, I feel like it's very difficult to wear his team down. His breaking options, Conkelda doesn't get beaten by bulky grounds, Mega Garchomp doesn't get beaten by bulky grounds, and Xurkitree definitely doesn't get beaten by bulky grounds unless they're also faster than
I
it.
retract my statement.
He has and he has a number of options for speed control as well in terms of Trick Room. I've mentioned already, Reuniclus and Bronzong both get it. He also has webs with Masquerain, which I think is going to be underrated by some people, but Masquerain with Mega Garchomp I feel is actually a good combo. But his team doesn't need webs to function, it's just an aspect that it can have. Obviously the fact that it is so slow is not good, but generally it's going to be hard for teams to actually break it because most of the mons are very fat. You mentioned Conkelda needs to be Assault Vest earlier. If you're taking physical hits, Conkelda doesn't need to be Assault Vest at all. It's incredibly bulky just by itself. The Florges is obviously equally specially bulky. He's got Wish Passing with it. He's got Cleric support with it as well. The Guts nerf with Conkelda makes it more of a pain to deal with. Nerf? I meant boost. Burn nerf or Guts boost. To take either of them, just don't take it as Guts nerf, because that was the opposite of what I meant to imply. Jellicent as well, I think, is a really good mod. It's just so hard to break his team, and there's a number of options that I think are actually very good for him in terms of Reuniclus in particular. It's not a round one pick. I don't think it's a round one pick at all. But equally, as you said already, there was no mon on his team that he clearly wanted that would have been a round one pick. So I don't really mind him picking up Reuniclus there, given that he didn't end up trying to pick up something else later. And the more and more I look at it, I don't see how you're breaking it, because what can you use effectively to break through a team with the combination of bulk and power that he does? Because it's not even as if he's got like Chansey and Skarmory and Toxapex and things like this. All of the bulk he has is offensively threatening as well, and I think that it's an underrated team, and he's going to do really, really well with it.
Well, talking about teams that have mons that can break shit, let's talk about the Borussia Donphan that have a Kira in black. Obviously, KB doesn't necessarily break Wolfie's team, because there are obviously sets that Wolf can run to deal with that, namely being like a Babiri Berry Florges is the first one that comes to mind, being able to kind of mitigate most of the stuff that KB can do, but regardless, I have Lars at...
Also things like Bronzong and...
Semantics!
And Valley Fairy.
I mean, technically Kieran does get Fling with Iron Ball, which will make it outspeed Bronzong and probably do like a shit ton.
Move on.
So Lars's team is an interesting one. I probably have him lower than he probably deserves, but it was really hard to pick between him and a lot of the guys that are between, I would say, 4th and 8th. It was really hard to pick where I wanted to rank these guys. They could honestly be ranked anywhere in that grouping, but I guess I just had him a bit lower because although I felt that like his cores and the overall balance was strong, there were a few mons that I was a bit iffy on. One thing I actually do like is the 2 Z-move mons that he chose. Gengar is obviously just a ridiculously good wall breaker, but I think there could be some really cool Z-moves that he could choose. And Yanmega, for the fact that it's not just that it has speed boost, but also tinted lens. Being able to, I believe, I was doing a calc the other day, and Z tinted lens Savage Spin Out Oko's a max HP Mega Sizzle, which is kind of cool. I mean, don't know if you're ever going to be in that situation, but you know what, that's kind of cool. I guess the big thing about his team that I just find a little bit iffy is, again, I feel that a lot of the team most of the time is very dependent on Kieran Black doing that job of wall breaking. Granted that Gengar is a solid wall breaker and he has a few other mons that can do some cool stuff, like obviously Tornai having now priority Defog as well as priority Tailwind, but I feel that Krook, you know, is more designed as that late game cleaner. Cobalion can be kind of good with like Double Dance or even Carmine, the same with Finny, but none of them are really like the out and out wall breakers that Gengar and Kieran Black are. So I see, you know, those 2 mons especially having a lot of pressure on them to break down a lot of teams. I do feel like things like Krook and that can sweep, that's not an issue, but it just means that, you know, Lars may have to be creative with some other sets that he uses. Like, I mean, Kamala with a band can be very, very scary. So that could be something. I mean, Garbodo with hazards is going to be a good way to break down the opposing teams too. But yeah, I don't have him as high as other teams just because I don't have as much faith in his wall breaking capabilities as other teams that are on the list, which I know is a bit of a nitpick, but at this point, like, a lot of teams are very similar and you have to try and find those flaws, and that's the flaw that I see. But regardless, we're going to keep on moving up. We got number 6 spots here. I have a team, obviously, that has been mentioned already in the Bronx Bearatics. You have a team we haven't talked about at all yet, which is the New Orleans Pelipers. Would you like to talk about them? Wait, hold on. Have we, like...
Yes.
No, we haven't...
No, we went to 7 and then we went back to 8 and now we've moved back forward to 6.
Pretty sure we're on the right thing. I'm just making sure.
We are on the right thing. This is why,
cool.
This is why we shouldn't skip picks next time.
Listen, we're fine. It's our first time, guys. Alright, give us a break. We'll get used to this. So New Orleans Pelipers, tell me...
Yeah, give him a break. At least I've been able to keep track of our own
It's 'cause
position.
you're British. Leave me alone. Alright, talk about John of the New Orleans Pelipers.
The only nitpick I have in his team, and this is a pretty minor nitpick, is the fact that he made Garchomp his only Z move mon. I'm not that much of a fan that he's not going to use his other 20 points. I mean, maybe he's saving them up for a transaction later. And I also think that Taunt a Zedmon than Garchomp anyway, because you can get most of the stuff you can get with Zed Garchomp with just Life Orb. But that's the only real nitpick I have with this team. In terms of speed, which is not something we've mentioned much, but it's one of the most crucial aspects of a draft, and I think he's got the balance of speed pretty much perfect on this team. He's got blisteringly fast with Jolteon, very, very fast with Tornadus, then a 110 with Mega Diancie, Garchomp as just a little bit above the hundreds as well, and some slower mons as well, like Hariyama, to make sure that walls can't just go zero bulk and try and force speed creep in that way. I like the speed tiers a lot. I also think that his breaking powers with Garchomp and Mega Diancie with Taunty are all very good. Hariyama, I already mentioned with Conkeldurr that the Guts got a boost this gen with Burn being nerfed. Serena, I'm a fan of it, especially after the move tutors buffed it and it got some extra toys to play around with that I'm completely blanking on at the moment. So Power Whip, that was it, thank you. Power Whip, I think that it now has a reliable grass stab and better than Trop Kick to threaten things that might want to come in on it. Escavalier, I think, is an underrated pick, just because of the sheer... It's bulkier than you all think it is, and just slapping a hit on a HP Fire won't actually work. It will live most of them, if not all of them, and it will be threatening back with a massive attack stat. Houndoom covers a number of weaknesses that were starting to merge with his team, with things like Serena and Escavalier and stuff like that. And I just am a massive fan of his team, in all honesty, just everything about it. The only complaint that I've mentioned, aside from the Z moves, physical wall breaking, he struggles with that a bit. His only real one is Garchomp, and then it goes down to Hariyama. I guess you could run Mega Diancie physically, but no one's going to. But I feel like the strength of his options on the special side of things is enough to make up for that, and I'm just really, really impressed by his draft. I think he's drafted really well.
Yeah, I mean, I might talk about him a little bit just because he's 5th for me, so he's still on this like slide that we're on. I mean, I think that, like you said, he has a very good draft. I would say the big flaws for me is not only the leaving of the points, because I think if he could have made the points to get Amon plus Houndoom, Z Houndoom could have been really cool to see. I think it has a lot of cool options, like Z Sunny Day could have been a really nice set for it to use, but alas. I think one of the biggest issues I have with his team, like you said, I mean, when it comes to physical attackers, he does also have a Scavalier when it comes to that, and Pylo is no slouch as well.
I wouldn't really call them breakers though.
Yeah, it's true.
Escavalier, I think, is a great mon, but it's too slow to really count as a breaker, unless you're going Trick Room, which he doesn't have outside of Cresselia, and you don't want to set Cresselia when you've got things like Jolteon and Mega Dance.
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest flaw that I have with John's team, and this may seem a bit harsh, but realistically, it just doesn't excite me. Like, you know when you see teams and you think like, oh man, I can't wait to see this team in action. I just really don't get that feeling with this team, which I know is a weird thing to say, but I just feel that a lot of the Mons in them...
I feel I'm more excited for it than you are.
I know, because like...
and I have him lower.
I just feel like a lot of these Mons I've seen, and it's the same thing as I guess Gator. A lot of these Mons I've seen John use before, and some of them good, some of them bad. And the only real Mons on his team that kind of perk my interest are Tornadus, Serena, and Diancie. Like, Garchomp, I think, wasn't the right Z-move user. I think he definitely could have picked some other things. Like, he could have gone maybe Jolteon plus Houndoom, would have given him a bit more versatility, I feel. Chomp doesn't really need it.
I'm sorry, we're snobs about Zed, but then you say Tornadus? Jeez.
I know.
What about contradictory?
I'm the worst. But I feel like obviously I still rate John highly because I think his battling makes up for whatever flaws his drafting may have. But I just don't see a lot of, I guess, you know, there's like X Factor Pokemon where you see them and they're ones that can, you know, do a lot of like, the closest that he has to that is Tornadus. I think that Diancie is okay. If he knows creative ways to use it, then all the more to him. But I think that, you know, a lot of his team is lacking that versatility. I think he has a lot of Mons that, for all intents and purposes, are very good at doing like one job, and that job very good. But there isn't a lot of versatility, and so for me, like when I see the team, it just doesn't really get me as excited as it should. I mean, it's still a good team. He's still 5th, but he's not good enough for my top 4 with a team like that, unfortunately.
I can understand it. I think that there's a bit more versatility than you might expect in some of these Mons. Mega Diancie, Taunty, Garchomp obviously have the ability to go physical as well as special. That goes for all of them. I
mean, as an analyst, I'm more than...
Hariyama as well. I think Hariyama's a really good pickup as well. Houndoom is good. There's a bit of versatility there, more, and I'm saying this now to cover myself because I've been criticizing people for being one-dimensional, like Astor, and MB in particular. I feel like he does have a lot of options for himself there as well, though.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, at the same time, like...
clearly we both rate the draft quite highly. Both got him
and
in
I mean,
the top
as
6.
an analyst, I am more than happy being proven wrong. I, like, implore coaches to go out of their way to prove me wrong. I'm more than happy to eat some humble pie. Does not bother me in the slightest. But that's just how I see the team, pure and simple. I guess...
Talking about eating humble pie, do you want to go back to my friend and explain why you've gotten, like, 7 picks higher than me?
Oh, Poe Jokie, of course. Joey's team, I felt I was a little bit confused by some picks. One of the big ones I remember having a chat with you about when I first saw it was Rhydon, which I understand some of the reasons why he wanted to pick it up, but balance-wise, I just didn't really see it fitting that well. I felt like, you know, he already had, you know, Zygarde plus Stack Attacker, which is all the rock and ground types that you really need. And when it comes to then other Stealth Rock setters, he had Stacker, Necrozma, and Miltank at the time. So it just felt like, I get that Rhydon was meant to take pressure off of Stack Attacker, but quite frankly, if you have Necrozma and Miltank already as Stealth Rock setters, and the rest of your team is quite balanced, I didn't really feel the need for it to be there, which kind of miffed me. But apart from that, I feel that the general balance of the team is quite solid. I'm actually interested to see what Zed Togedemaru can actually do. I actually don't really know it that well. All I know is he gets some like meme moves like a Fell Stinger and whatnot. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
I imagine most weeks is going to be Zed Necrozma.
I would assume so too. I think Necrozma, a lot of people have slept on it because with the latest move tutors, being able to get Heat Wave is a really important one. Power Gem is not as important, but one of the big ones I think is Photon Geyser. Because I don't think a lot of people realize that Photon Geyser hits... it's not type. It's... how would you explain it? Where it goes between like special and physical damage? Kind of...
It calculates based on your highest stat, so it can be either physical or special depending on
Yeah,
your
so you can
own
run like
best.
an SD Necrozma or a Carmine Necrozma. Either way, you can use Photon Geyser and it can really throw your opponents off guard, which I think is a really cool tech. I think regular Heracross is pretty underrated. I think with Moxie it's a very good sweeper, but at the same time, it still has like a very decent bulk, and pairing it with something like Stack Attacker, which doesn't give a shit about HP flying, is really nice. I am obviously a big fan of Zygarde. I think it's such a strong mon. I am a little bit confused as to, I honestly, as much as Z Togedemaru is cool, I think that Zygarde is incredible with Z moves. Like, the amount of damage it can do, the amount of interesting sets you can create using Z moves, I think Joey missed out on a really good opportunity there. But at the same time, I can understand Necrozma wanted to be a Z move user. I think Whimsicott, obviously, with Tailwind is nice. Stack Attack is a monster. Gyarados, I love that mon too. Overall, I think his draft is really solid. I think there are a few draft selections, being Togedemaru and Rhydon, that I'm questioning. I feel like he could have got better mons in both of those positions. But overall, it's quite a solid draft, and Joey's battling obviously backs up anything that he does. So that's why I've got him a bit higher than you do, I guess, because I back his battling ability to be able to make up for whatever flaws the draft has.
I'm not really accounting battling abilities that much into my rankings. Mine are more based on draft than I believe yours are. But when I'm looking at his team, and this is just as an example, what does he switch into an Infernape? What does he switch into a Thundy Eye? Things like this. The mixed wall breakers like this with quite a few move options with good neutral moves, just like Bolt Beam and stuff. He doesn't have great answers for them, and I'm concerned basically. But I've already talked about Joey at length, so we'll move on then.
Yes, so we'll move on to the last of this group, and before we get into our top four, last team we're going to talk about is the team you put at number 5, which is the San Francisco Giants. Quite a move up for Gio. I know that normally people have him down a bit lower, but I mean, we've both been very impressed with his draft this season.
Yeah, it's Stall with Blacephalon and Haxorus. But it's well-made Stall with Blacephalon and Haxorus. I think that he's drafted really, really well around the threats that he has. He has a number of versatile mons like Mew, like Mega Scizor, but the mons that only do one job, they do the job really, really well. Toxapex is Toxapex. Everyone knows how good Toxapex is at doing what Toxapex does. Ditto, I normally hate Ditto, but it fits this team really well. It helps deal with the setup sweepers that would otherwise be a massive problem to his team. Mega Scizor, I'm a big fan of Mega Scizor, and I think that a slow U-turn into things like Dugtrio, which will be able to deal with a lot of things that will deal with Mega Scizor. Dugtrio plus Blacephalon. Name a Blacephalon counter that doesn't get dealt with by Dugtrio. There's not many of them. I feel like his Z selection as well with Blacephalon and Archeops, I think that he's got the best combination of Z and move users out of anyone aside from maybe a guy that we'll talk about later, but definitely of all the people we talked about so far, I like his Z move options the best because I feel like Z Archeops is the best tier 5 Z mon that we've seen, and Z Blacephalon having that extra breaking power to get past something like maybe a Miltank or something, I think will serve Blacephalon really, really well, especially with Dugtrio supporting it. Haxorus is a big threat that you can't overlook. I'm gonna call it now, he's gonna win at least 3 games by time of stall just through the fatness of his mons, but it's well-made fat, and the offensive options he has on the team in the forms of Mew, Haxorus, Mega Scizor, Dugtrio, Slurpuff, and the 2 Zmons that I already talked about, they provide enough offensive pressure, while some of them also have defensive-minded sets, that I feel like he's just drafted really, really impressively, and he's done really well. The one nitpick I have is that his team is quite slow. He doesn't have anything that outspeeds a base 110, and I know you can say that Slurpuff will after it belly drums and then burdens or something, and Mega Scizor has priority, but Mega Scizor is his only priority outside of Sucker Punch Dugtrio. Dugtrio also outspeeds 110s, but it's not switching in, and I'm not that much of a fan of his speed tiers, basically. There's a big gap basically, in terms of what I'm looking for in speed tiers. Yeah, Archeops is also base 110, but I just clearly forgot about that when I was making my note for this team. But Archeops as well, again, it and Dugtrio are not coming every week, and you're going to struggle against faster things, essentially, is my only real problem with it. But saying that, I feel like the strengths outweigh it. And that's the nitpick as well, I should point out. That's not a big flaw.
No, that's fair enough. We're going to move on to the next. So we're going to look at the 3rd and 4th ranked teams. Obviously, I have the Giants as a 3rd. I agree with almost everything you've said except for one thing. The big thing about the speed is you also have to remember, and I thought you were going to mention it was Slurpuff, but you didn't.
Oh,
Slurpuff
webs,
gets
of course.
sticky web,
Webs.
which is a big thing for his team because
I had overlooked sticky
the
webs,
big thing
actually,
too
yeah.
with his team as well is he has a lot of mons that punish defog. Like, not in the sense of like a Bishop that can obviously get Defiant boost, but more mons that can...
Giving a free switch to Haxorus or Blacephalon is not something
And
you want to
also,
do.
like, a lot of the times, it's not even that free switch, it's also finding the time when you can get a certain defogger in to click defog, which is hard in itself. Like, if you allow, Geo's Toxapex to get a free recover, that's going to be a problem. If you allow Sizzle to roost, if you allow Slurpuff to belly drum, even if Chesnaught wants to belly drum, because sub Salak and BD Chesnaught is a scary set. If you allow any of his mons to do stuff, then you're behind the 8-ball, and because he has a few really solid stealth rockers, like not just Mew, the fact is, like, Ditto is a mon that Geo's used in the past, and he's used it incredibly well. He understands how Ditto is meant to be used. He's like, you don't see a lot of players doing it these days, but he is one of the players that really understands how to use Ditto in a format, and that's what makes it scary on this team. And yes, I did make a bold prediction saying that for this season he's going to either win or lose games a lot of times to the time running out. Not necessarily to time of stall, because that's a bad word apparently in the community, but to the time of running out per se.
Fine.
I know, like, I couldn't care less. Like, time of stall, people do it in the NFL, why the hell do we shun it in the GBA? I don't understand. But regardless, I think Geo's team overall, hence why I ranked him 3rd, is phenomenal. For him, like, he has evolved so much through the seasons that I've watched him to get to this stage, and I think that it harmonizes the defensive playstyle that he uses so well with some really solid offensive options. It's not just the fact that he has those mons that can just rip straight through walls like Blacephalon, Haxorus, and Archeops, but then also has those late game cleaners in Slurpuff, Scizor, and even Mew to an extent. And because there's a lot of bulk, like you were saying, with the rest of his team, it does allow Mew to potentially be more aggressive, which is the counter argument to what we were saying about Jolt's team, in that Jolt Celesteela never really currently on that team has the opportunities to be as aggressive as he'd want it to be. So that's kind of showing that difference, but overall really solid team. The only nitpick I would just say is that, like, obviously, like you said, it's very dependent on Slurpuff getting up webs or unburdening to get, like, all of that speed to be in a good place. And I think the other issue that I find with it is that a lot of his team is very much shut down by a fast taunt user, which is not ideal. Like, look at the majority of his team and look at, like, Tornadus Therian with taunt. It shuts down a lot of mons.
Yes, that'll be it.
So that's a big thing that Geo's got to watch out for, and I know that he can potentially play around it, obviously. So it's just it's again, like we're saying, we're nitpicking here. Like, we think that Geo has a great team, but we're also highlighting that there are going to be some issues throughout the season. And the other thing about Geo's team that he has to watch out for is that he can be reverse timer stall here. Like, he can't just play for the long game and then not back it up with his team, because the opponent could also bring quite a cancerous team and he might lose out in that regard. So he's got to definitely think about it both ways as a double-edged sword. But overall, I'm a huge fan of Geo's team. Moving on though, a team that I had down quite considerably lower in 12th that you have in 4th is the Detroit Steel Wings.
I think this is the biggest difference that we have
I think it might be. Yeah, it might be.
Positions. Yeah, I think that Crimson's team is actually really, really good. The big issue that you pointed out in particular, and correct me if I'm wrong because it was close to an hour ago now, was the breakers being just Thundy and Infernape. And frankly, when you've got two breakers that are as good at breaking as those two are, I feel like wanting more options, which he does as well have, like Lycanroc Dusk and Jirachi, and Suicune itself as well, are good wall breakers. But when those two in particular, those were the two go-to examples I used when talking about Joey's difficulty switching into either of them. And they have such mixed potential, both of them. Both of them can nasty plot, both of them can set up on the physical side as well. Both of them have their own forms of priority, with Infernape having, of course, actual hitting moves, whereas Tornadus has Prankster. But they're very, very, very good at breaking. And then the rest of the team, the Jirachi, I think, is a good mon. It can break. You might not like the idea of Rachi breaking via para-flinching and things, but it can break that way. Suicune, I think, is an amazing pick. It covers a lot of holes that could have potentially been opened up if you'd gotten a lesser water. Lycanroc Dusk, I think, is a very, very good Lycanroc form. I think he's going to do really well with it. It's powerful as well, and fast, and it's got a good move pool and priority itself. Mega Beedrill, U-turning, combining with Thundery Eye, being able to Volt Switch on things, he's going to have momentum. He's got relatively good hazard options as well, in terms of he's got T-Spikes and options Beedrill, although he doesn't have Spikes, which I would have liked on this sort of team, a momentum-based team. Kofag as well, I think, is a very good pick. He's got a lot of bulk and a lot of good offense. His breaking options are very good. His Z move mon, Thundery Eye is an amazing Z move mon. Kangaskhan, he actually mentioned it in his video that he got beat up by John using a Z Thunder Kangaskhan, but there will be occasions where you want to use Kangaskhan as a scrapping mon with sweeping options. It does also get cursed now that Generation 2 has been implemented to be able to transfer from Gen 2 on the DS to the current gen. Tangela is actually a really good late pick as well. Really bulky as a grass, and just there's a number of things that I really, really like about his team. He's also picked up mons that I personally really enjoy using, Mega Beedrill in particular, but he's got good Volt Turn, he's got good Z move mons, he's got good setup options. I think that most of the mons in his team can set up. Rachi can, Suicune can, Donphan can, as we found out from Envy. Lycanroc can, Kofag can, Granbull I think can bulk up, but I'm not 100% on that. Mega Beedrill can stance, Thundery Eye can set up, and as can Infernape. The only mon on his team that cannot set up in any way, shape, or form is Tangela, and the options that he has, I feel like he's going to have the room to breathe in them, because even if he goes for setup on something like a Donphan or a Kofag with Trick Room, Nasty Plot or something, he has the bulk to cover them with the rest of his team in the forms of like Rachi and Suicune and Granbull that will be able to cover for them. He has good breaking options, he has good Volt Turn. I really, really, really rate this quite highly.
Just gonna throw this one in here, but I do believe Tangela gets access to growth.
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm not going to count mons that technically get a setup move, and mons that can actually potentially run.
Are you saying growth Tangela is not a viable set? Blasphemy. Anyway.
I know where you live.
Jesus, that's not that's not something you want to hear when you're recording a video. Anyway, we're gonna move on. So
I don't actually.
The team that I have.
It's vaguely
I'm literally just moving on, dude. I don't give a shit anymore. So the team I have in fourth is Astor. Obviously, you talked about a lot of the issues with the team, but I think I just want to highlight maybe some more of the positives and why I had him a bit higher. I think one big thing with a lot of teams is drafting a team that suits the player. And like we saw earlier with Jolt that he wasn't very happy with his draft and how it kind of fitted his style. Whereas Astor, this is like a lot more up his alley. From what I've seen him draft in the past, there's a lot of stuff that he's quite comfortable with, but there's also some interesting gems. I think Shell Smash Z Barbaracle could be a very scary mon to deal with. If broadened under the right circumstances, of also like the potential fear of it being a Zoroark and people trying to play around that, Barbaracle could be a...
Bear in mind, with Zoroark on the DS now, it will tell you it's a Zoroark if you just look at what's super effective.
Yeah, true.
It doesn't work as it used to.
Well, I mean, let's just say the coaches don't realize that. But no, for all intents and purposes, like...
I don't tend to assume that coaches are just going to be bad.
For all intents and purposes, Barbarical is still scary, even without like the speed boosting or power boosting. Like, it's still a very strong mon with tough claws, and is kind of underrated. I think that, you know, his bulk is exceptional. I think just the combination of Milotic and Sylveon and Zapdos, like those three, is just gross, like as a defensive core. But I also think that, like, offensively, like Lopunny, I know that you have like a very big crush on Lopunny in the sense of how amazing it is as a breaker, and just how it's one of those mons like Kira and Black that it might only have one role, but God, is it good at that one role. So he's got that. I think, yeah, Zoroark's a bit of an iffy one just because of, you know, how it's orientated now. I think the Decidueye is really cool. I think it's very underrated as a, I wouldn't say it's a bulky grass type, but as a grass type in general, even a ghost type, pretty underrated. And Scully as a Z-move user was very, very interesting. I think that it could be solid. I feel like it's not bad. I think pairing it with Barbarical is alright. It would have been interesting to see maybe some other mons potentially be Z-moved. I'm also just...
I don't really think you can say that on this team because his team doesn't have any standout.
Devastating Drake Milotic is coming for dragons. Who needs Ice Beam when you can Devastating Drake?
I was there thinking you were going to say Drodagon.
No.
But no, you went Milotic.
I mean, no, Drodagon doesn't need it because that's the thing with Drodagon. It's the same situation of like, oh, I'm going to put Z moves on my Nidoking and Nidoqueen. Why would you put Z moves on something that gets Sheer Force? It's going to be stronger without the Z move if you just give it a Life Orb. So, it baffles me. But I think Scully's still going to be solid. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the GBA has banned Speed Pass. So it makes Scully a little bit less desirable, which is maybe why I've got him a little bit lower than the top 3, is just that I feel that although he has a lot of good mons, I feel the practicality of some of them is a little bit less than desired. I also just... It's going to be interesting. I think he's drafted a team that suits his style, so he'll play well with it. But I feel as an overall draft, I can understand why you put it 9th, because it's not as appealing to the eye as some of the other drafts that we've seen. But given the style that Astor plays and the way that this team will suit that, I think that he'll do well with it, and that's why I've got him ranked quite highly. And like you said, there were a lot of mons there that you don't even really need to think too much about them. They're the kind of ones where, yes, they're one-dimensional, but they are like the best of the one-dimensional. So we'll see how he goes with it.
I mean, my bold prediction for this is that all of the new coaches make play.
Well, there you go.
So I clearly think he's going to do well, but it's just that draft doesn't excite me that much.
So before we get into the top 2, the last team to talk about is the team you ranked 3rd. I had them a little bit lower, but like I said, that group from 8th to 3rd, or no, 8th to 4th, really could have gone with any team. So do you want to maybe kind of confirm like why Lars's team is so damn good?
Yeah, the only real problem I have with it is that Kieran Black wasn't chosen as a Z-move user, but I guess that was because you wanted Yanmega as his Z-move user alongside Gengar. I think that generally the options he's got, the variety of those options, the wall-breaking prowess, the hazards, everything about it, I like almost every aspect. He's a tad slow with Mega Absol being his fastest thing, although Yanmega with Speed Boost makes up for that. But generally speaking, I feel like his team does a really, really good job with itself. I feel like he supported Kieran Black really well, getting things like Gengar to help break for it, getting things like Tapu Fini to make sure that it can't get status. I don't even think Tapu Fini is bad with KB because you don't really use Dragon moves on Kieran Black that often anyway. Garbodor, I think, was a really good pick late on to get both Spikes and T-Spikes, especially as a tier 5. I think that's a really good late round pick. He got Spin with Kamala, which, I mean, it's not exactly brilliant, but it's still another hazard removal option alongside Prankster Defog and Finny Defog as well. He's got a number of good Rocks options in Crocodile and Cavalion. He's got most of what I look for in a team, and I think he's just drafted really well.
Sure, like, I mean, as I said, even though I've got him 8th, he could have easily been 4th. Like, it was really hard to choose.
Well, I mean, I also think that things like the Zed Yan Mega bump him up for me as well. I feel like that's a really good underrated pick. The Shaman is an excellent bulky grass. I just don't really see how you look at the team and approach it from building to try and beat it, because essentially whatever aspects you go for, if you go for trying to break down his walls, they're pretty fat and you're gonna have a hard time doing so. He's also gonna be able to break down your walls pretty easily, so you can't just stall them out. The only real reliable way is gonna be with things like outspeeding him, and even then he's still got some fast mons. It's not as if he's very, very slow. He's nowhere near as slow as Wolfie is, and he does have tailwind options and stuff like that. But I'm just a big fan of the way his draft has panned out.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that and also a big factor is that Lars is quite a good battler, which I think will just add into that too. That'll make him more of a threat. But it is time, ladies and gentlemen.
Saying that though, I think we both agreed that the top 2 teams are clearly the top 2
Yes, and it should
teams.
come to no surprise if you've been following this for the last God knows how long it's been recording for. You should realize who the top 2 teams are now, so we're going to pop them up. Psych, they were the exact same. We have them in different orders, but realistically, like, it doesn't really matter too much.
I think you're pretty interchangeable.
I think, yeah, these 2 teams we felt were not head and shoulders above the rest, but they were clearly overall the top 2 teams. So I guess we can kind of talk about both of them, maybe highlighting certain points. Like Mono's team, for me, was just, again, when we talk about like with Astor, when you get those players that just draft teams that suit their style. We've both played against Mono, I believe. Have you played against Mono? Good.
Yes. I played against him, I think, 3 times.
And we know that this team like perfectly fits his style. Like it literally fits him like a glove. He's got so much versatility. People are gonna sleep on Z Sloking. They really are. You don't realize how.
I'm one of them. That's one of the flaws that got in this draft.
Like,
selection.
Z Sloking is going to take freaking lives. I'm telling you right now. Like, it's gonna be a scary mon to deal with. He loves Gliscor, and now Gliscor can run Defog with Poison Heal, which is a massive boost for it. I think the offensive core of Keldeo plus Zardex is going to be really frustrating to deal with for a lot of teams. There's not a whole lot of mons that can really stop that combination of things. He's got Snorlax, which I know that you really rate. Yeah, you really rate that as a mon. And Weaver, which he's used a lot of times in the past and has had a lot of success with. It's an incredibly good offensive mon. And the fact that he got it so late in the draft was great. And I think what he did better than almost anybody was he used his points so well that he picked up. Like, none of his mons, barring maybe Palossand, would even be considered that bad. And Palosand's not even that bad of a mon, really. I would have preferred Golurk, but at the same time, Golurk doesn't get the recovery, I guess. Dragalge plus Zardex is also like a really solid combination, because there's actually not a whole lot of mons that can wall that combination. Even though they're both dragons, like, they deal with different mons in different ways. Which is really solid. And although Registeel is kind of one-dimensional as a steel type, I think pairing it with Comfy and then Zardex as that Fairy Dragon Steel Core, or pairing it with Dragalge, makes it really versatile. The only downside I would say to Mono's team is just a mon like, I mean, it's very unlikely, but freaking Mold Breaker mons like Drill are going to run through it, because he has Rotom Cut and Gliscor as his 2 main answers to ground types, which I guess, if, Gravity or something is like...
Gliscor isn't beaten by an Excadrill.
Probably not, because Gliscor is thick as, but I think it's really hard to, honestly, with both of these teams, find a flaw. Like, I'm just trying to find one right now, but realistically there isn't one.
I found one for Mono for you. It's the Z moves. I feel like I would have preferred to see something a bit more like... I would have preferred to see Z Keldeo.
Z Keldeo, dude,
or Z
even
Snorlax. I feel like
Z Keldeo plus Z Palossand would have been cool, because Palossand probably gets some cool things.
I feel like, I honestly feel the only problem I really have is Slowking over Snorlax as a Z-move user. I feel like Snorlax has a lot of brilliant Z-move options, but he's my number one, so I'm allowed to think that that's a very minor nitpick for him. Tom is the team that we've not really talked about. I know you have him a bit higher than you have Mono. Tom drafted really, really, really well. It's almost as if he got a checklist of everything I would want in a draft and then ticked them all off one by one. Lando T, as his Z-move user, is one of the best, if not the best, Z-move mon of the format. I love the Volt turn that he's got going on with Rotom Wash and Scizor. I really am a fan of Kamoa with its mixed potential. I feel like Roserade is amazing with Toxic Spikes and Spikes. I think I've mentioned twice in this already that I would have preferred to see teams with Spikes to help break down their checks. He's got that. He's got a Mega Houndoom that can take advantage of most of these things. His speed tiers are really, really good. He's got Swellow as an amazing mixed option. He's got a lot of versatility on his team as well. And the ones that are one-dimensional are really, really good at that role with things like Scizor and Rotom Wash. I'm just a big, big fan of this draft. And the only real downside, I would say, is that generally his team doesn't recover that well, and I don't think Aloma Mola Wish Passing is enough to compensate for that. And but what I mean by that is if he's in a situation where he's slogging hit for hit and trying to go mano-y-mano rather than set up his speed, he's going to struggle because Sizzle can roost and stuff, but his bulkier mons are not very bulky when they can't recover, and he can't bring a Loma Mola every week because it's a massive momentum drain. And that's the only real problem I have with his draft. It's a big enough one that makes just enough of a difference for me to put him below Mono, but I would say that both of us agree that Mono and Tom are clearly the top two.
100%. I mean, the only real flaw I had with Tom was literally what you just said. The big thing too about Tom's team is I think it is the one team in the entire... I'd say him and John are the two guys where I look at their team and say, like, nothing on that team feels out of place. Like, everything feels like it has some sort of tangible purpose and wasn't just slapped on because you didn't have enough points for something else. Like, everything has something that it can do. Like, even Diancie and Cryogonal, in their own ways, can be incredibly solid mons. So, I definitely feel like that's a major plus. But I feel like, yeah, they are definitely the top two heading into the season. Now, obviously, guys, these will change throughout the season. This is just how we feel on face value and slightly, in my case, on player value. But as the season goes on, these will change and we will continue to analyze and whatnot. But you know what? I think that's basically summed up. This has been an hour and a half. And like, obviously these are not going to be as... We can edit it, and like, these aren't going to be as long as this in the future. The issue is like the first power ranking is always the longest because you're analyzing all the drafts, whereas when we go into the actual rankings, we're going to be looking at the battles themselves, where there's going to be less to discuss during that time. So don't expect hour and a half power rankings every week, guys. It'll probably be down to like half an hour to 45 minutes at the most, but we just wanted to try and give you a bit more of an in-depth look into the teams and how we see them going this season. But we do hope you've enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, make sure that you like this video. Don't forget, if you are new around here, to subscribe to the GBA's channel, and don't forget to check out all the coaches and all the other analyst videos that happen on this channel. Any last words you'd like to say, Abe?
We'll see you next week at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursdays.
Hell yeah. With that being said, this is The Verd and Abe, and we will catch you next time.